Hello there and welcome to Laurence Plays Factorio Planetary Pioneers, where we've got more than 20 planets, more than 30 science packs, 5 players, over 100 mods, and many headaches. However, one of those headaches that we've more or less fixed now is the city block system down on Norvis. And I'm not going to call this finished because, well, this is Factorio. Nothing is ever actually genuinely finished. However, I would say this has now got to the point where it is up and running at a point where it's actually useful and it's producing all of the things we want it to. This has been quite a major build over the last sort of month or so, from starting off with just a few blocks around here that were maybe making some crushed iron or ore and then iron plates down in this corner, and then it's expanded out with a load of combat done over on this side to free up a load of extra space, and we started putting out most of the original bus system that was across here and all the mining. The only bit that's left of that at the moment is all of the previous iron processing and that was in here, and copper processing as well. So all of this, and this is gradually being pulled up by the bots, and hopefully the inputs have been cut off, and the inputs have been slightly cut off, okay. So the bots are jolly busy collecting stuff and flying it all away, but in theory eventually we'll have pulled up all of this and we'll have completely got rid of the original bus system, and we can put in an extra 6 city blocks in this area. And so the expansion has gone quite well. We've had a few times when we've run out of blocks to build, or more or less run out of blocks to build stuff in, but there's always been a few sort of awkward ones like these ones up here that are full of water, or over here, and we're sort of, I want to say we're saving them for nuclear reactors, but mostly we're just not using them because it would take forever to landfill them properly. So we've been skipping a few of those, but now also Marc has done a bit further expansion over here where the bus used to be, and over to this side as well, over into the east, so we've now got quite a lot of free city blocks over here that we can eventually use to expand things a little bit further as it's required. A couple of major changes that have happened over here is that we've switched over to an LTN based system now. So previously we were using Marc's system of sort of a vanilla LTN system that he produced sort of through sort of lots of head scratching and working on things between streams. But now we've switched over to the traditional LTN system. So you can see we've got an LTN station in here with the traditional combinator and lamps and so on around it. And this is working exactly as you expect LTN to, although we've used one of the 2.0 features to make things a little bit better. So we have a standard LTN train station setup signals along here, and these have an actual name assigned to it, and that means that we've got a network set here. We've got the train limit, we've got the maximum train length, and we've got the requests stack threshold size all set on this thing. And this means if we go in here, if I put in something else in here, like, I don't know, a Z for just because that's a convenient thing that won't actually break anything. If I now come over and look at another provider station, you'll see that the Z has magically appeared over here as well, and that's because the LTN requester signal set is shared across all of them. And so that means if we want to move them all to a different network because we want to do funny shenanigans, or we want to change the train limits or any of the other settings, or if we want to add in new settings along here, we only have to change it in one place and it will update all of them. Then we additionally have the no group assigned set down here, which in this case is requesting 48,000 copper plates. And that means that for each individual station we drop in, we can tell it what to request, and it won't affect the signals that are being put on everything else. And this is a lovely new feature that was added in Factorio 2.0 with the improved signals systems. And it means we can easily copy these signals around between stations. We can edit them very easily while still not messing up the slight differences that exist between all the different stations. Most relevant, this is going to mean we're going to be able to nudge up the train limits on here, because we've been thinking about this a bit, and we've got a bit of a problem with throughput on particularly some of the stations like the coal plates pickup or the crushed coal drop off, where you can see this station is kind of starting to run out of crushed copper a little bit. Now this is a weird case where there's enormous amounts in these chests, but in theory you could imagine if this was starting to run out, well, eventually we get a train sent from a depot out to a copper crushing area, like perhaps this one all the way on the other side of the city system, where it pick it up and then it bring it over to here. And then when it gets over here to drop off the crushed copper, then at that point, once it finally leaves this station, another train can be dispatched. And that's quite a lot of driving that the trains need to do in between picking up and dropping off at various different places. And I talked about this in the last video a little bit as well. So a possible fix for this would be to go in here and set this and say, well, actually I want to have a train limit of 2 on all of my stations scattered around here, and that will update every single requester station across the entire system, which could potentially cause some mess, especially as we don't have stacker spaces on here. However, it's fairly quick to unload a train when it pulls into one of these stations, so it could mean that things will work a little bit better. Now, Tristan has been going around and upgrading some of the stations where we got this problem by basically just going in with an upgrade planner and upgrading all of the blue inserters across here to green inserters. And that means that we can get a much faster unloading from these. So even when we do get an excess amount in these inner chests like this, it'll unload fast enough that we can get decent solid belts coming out of here. Another probably better way to do this would be to have each pair of inserters along here loading up a single belt, and then we'd have 3, 6, 9, 12 belts coming out of here, which we could then combine into 6 belts using these connectors here, and then maybe down to 3 belts using another set of splitters, and then we do a 3-to-2 balancer in order to get it all out of here nice and neatly. That would be the better way to do it, but that would take up quite a lot more space, and this way is nice and easy, which is kind of why we've used it. And for areas where we're not doing full belt throughput from these, it works just as well. However, for areas like this, it might be worth switching them over. The problem is, switching over like that does cause a certain amount of downtime for the station, and we have some quite heavy demands on the system at the moment because we're trying to fill up all the buffers all around the factory and trying to get things up and running as quickly as possible. So this gets back to the reason why we've switched over from Marc's system to the actual LTN mod system. And there are a couple of reasons. One is because LTN supports round robin, which means that when you're dropping off whatever resources it is you're dropping off, the trains will go to all of the different stations in turn. So we'll take copper from here, it'll go to green circuits, and it'll go to red circuits, and it'll go to science packs, and wherever else is requesting copper, rather than it always being taken to the nearest one until that fills up. And that's quite nice, because it means you can have everything running at a slower rate rather than one particular thing running flat out and everything else being absolutely starved. Now in the long run it doesn't really matter because you still need to increase your supply to the point where it can support absolutely everything at the same time, but in the short term it can be quite nice to help sort of bring everything up and get everything running together. Another thing LTN allows is prioritization of different stations, so we could say that perhaps the green circuits and the red circuits are the highest priority for copper because we care about keeping them running more than we care about keeping the science packs running, for example, or whatever order we decide we care about. Or alternatively, we want to get them all running as an absolute top priority because that builds all the buildings that we're going to need to expand everything else. So you can tweak the priorities there. Marc's system also allows for station prioritization using the new priority settings that 2.0 added in for stations. LTN does also allow prioritization though, as we discussed, so that's going to be very useful. Another thing which I'm going to get back to a bit later on when I get on to talking about the science packs is that LTN allows you to do multiple drop-offs or multiple pickups as well. So you can have a station where multiple resources are being dropped off at the same station and then you have to work out how to sort them out afterwards. Or you can have a station where multiple things are being picked up from the same station by different trains, and all of these work nicely together. You can even have mixed trains, but I think we're probably not going to go quite that far. And unfortunately, no matter how hard he thought about it, Marc couldn't come up with a way of making his system do that. So we've switched over to LTN for those reasons, which is going to help us out quite a bit. As part of this, we've tweaked a few of the LTN settings. So we've turned off message level because we were getting a lot of spam because we had a lot of stations that were short of stuff. It's probably almost time to turn that back on again, but I think there's still quite a bit of stuff we're short of. We've turned on GPS tags, and I'm not sure what that does. I think that might be something to do with how the trains get configured when they're sent to places. I'm not sure. We've got the request and provide threshold set to ridiculously large numbers, so those are so they won't mess around with the settings we're implementing. And we've got the stop timeout set to 0 over here for the stop timeout, and quite a long time for the delivery timeout. And that means it's more likely that your trains will do what we want them to do when things go a little bit wrong. So, for example, if a train ends up in a station but can't get its resources, it'll stay there forever because we need to go in and find out what's happened there, why it's broken, rather than having a train trundling around potentially with an enormous amount of stuff in its inventory and maybe dropping it off somewhere where we don't want it to. This shouldn't ever happen, but if some of the thresholds or the numbers or the setup has been done incorrectly, it can still happen. We've also increased the delivery timeout for the same reason, so it's gone up from 10 minutes to an hour. Again, this means that if a train does get lost, it should end up sitting somewhere, and hopefully we'll spot it and sort it out. Because again, if it just trundles back to the depot, well, you can find you get all kinds of problems related to things not getting delivered to stations that need them, or trains ending up with resources in places where they shouldn't be. It can lead to chaos, and we don't want chaos. And we've turned off finish loading as well, so a train should leave as soon as it's got enough stuff on board. That does risk, as it says, leaving stuff in the inserters at loading stations, but we'll work around that if we need to. Between them, these settings basically make LTN work a little bit more the way we want it to, and that's quite important. All trains are now being powered by rocket fuel in order to keep them moving around at a decent speed, and that's been done simply by switching the fuel drop-off stations over to requesting rocket fuel instead of coal, and then there may have been some manual swapping out in the trains. I'm honestly not sure. Oh no, we've just been chucking rocket fuel in them, and they'll eventually burn through all the coal probably, and if and when they do, then they'll switch over to using rocket fuel, but it doesn't really matter if there's a bit of coal left in in there, because the trains will use it in an emergency, but most of the time they'll just be powered by rocket fuel, and that's great. We've expanded out the depots, so one depot of 16 trains was not enough, so we've got a second one over here on the west side, we've got another one down here somewhere over to the southeast, and that means we have capacity for 48 trains, which is obviously better than 16 trains, means things will work better, the trains won't be overworked quite as much, and because this is LTN and we've got a city block design, adding in more trains was as simple as just copying this block and pasting it in another couple of times where it was needed, and that's the wonder of a city block. It's very, very easy to expand. Speaking of the depots, Marc has put in a safety system. So we're reading the train contents of every train that gets in there, and then the station is watching that contents, and as long as everything equals 0, so that is, there is nothing in the train, then the station will be enabled. If there's anything at all in the train's contents, then the signal here will have something on it, and the station will automatically be disabled, and that means we'll know that something has gone wrong, a train has come back here with something in its inventory, and we need to look into that. Well, at the very least, we need to clean out the junk from the train, and we also probably need to look into why it's happened and see if we can work out what's caused a train to get back here with a load of stuff in its inventory. Now that does tend to be pretty hard, because as soon as a train arrives back in an LTN station, all of its schedule information gets wiped and you just see the basic LTN signal there. So it's kind of difficult to tell why the problem has occurred. But hopefully we'll be able to take a stab at it from looking at what's in the train, and therefore we'll know maybe it's a plastic problem, or it's a coal problem, or whatever it is. We'll be able to work out that somehow that train has come back here with some resources in its inventory, and it's better to keep the train here and disable the station than it is to send the train off to do to go and get another load, which best case will only be a partial load, and therefore will probably cause the train to get stuck in the pickup station. Worst case may get unloaded into the drop-off station and cause pollution on the belts. To ensure that we notice when a train comes back with stuff in it, all the depot stations have now been wired up to loudspeakers, so we'll be alerted if necessary. As you can see here, if anything is greater than 0, so if there's anything at all in the train, then we'll sound an alarm, which will make it'll make a local noise, but we'll get a global alert popping up showing that there's a non-empty train at the depot. We can follow that alert signal back and find out which one it is that's having the problems. In an attempt to prevent the sort of pollution I'm referring to, all of the unloading stations do have filters set on the inserter. So you can see here that this will only unload plastic into these chests. So if a train does turn up here with other stuff in it, it may well end up just sitting here, but at least it won't chuck out a load of coal or copper or iron onto these belts and pollute the entire system, which is a much, much harder thing to clean up. So yeah, that's going to work. That's going to help a lot. And I think Marc and maybe Sophia as well have been spending quite a lot of time going around stations and doing upgrades to them, tweaking the settings on them when we've realised that actually there should be things like these filters on there. So I'm very glad they've been doing that, because that's the thing that I hate doing, partly because it's really dull, and also because it's really dull and therefore makes for bad stream content. So it's nice to have someone else doing that. Although we do apparently have a plastic problem, but we'll look into that later. Similarly, all of the loading stations, the requester stations, are all keeping an eye on what's required by the train and loading specific amount, or at least close approximations of specific amounts. So you can see over here that we're taking the reading the contents of the train from the station, and we're also reading the output of the LTN system here, which tells us what the train wants. And so when those get added together, that tells you what the train still wants, or rather once one of those gets subtracted from the other, that tells you what the train still wants. So if it comes in asking for 10,000 red circuits, then we'll get 10,000 red circuits coming out of here. When it's partly loaded, we'll have maybe 5,000 coming out of here. That 5,000 gets negated and then subtracted, and then all the way along here, we're passing in a signal of 5,000 red circuits, which gradually goes down and down and down as the train gets loaded up, until the point where the train is full, or at least has got everything it's been told to pick up, at which point we'll then clear the filters on these, and the inserters will stop loading the train up. So that should mean that we can do partial trains. If we only want 5,000 red circuits to be delivered somewhere, then they can be picked up by this system as well, and we won't overload it. In theory, this also means that you can do funny stuff like having a train loaded up with multiple different things, and I think LTN may support trains going to multiple stations. I don't remember for sure, but there's various possibilities for doing clever stuff with that, particularly around requesting partial loads. And that also means that the train can be told to leave when it's got to a certain amount of stuff, and then it'll clear off and take that to wherever it's needed, without needing to take a full load through. The next thing I want to talk about is all the various different city blocks we've added in, and I'm going to go through this very, very quickly because it's going to get a little samey because, well, a lot of it is just bring in a resource, process it, and feed out a processed resource. So we'll start off with wood. This is pretty straightforward. I think we've got the burner agricultural towers here. I wonder what they're using for fuel. They're using coal for fuel. So we're feeding coal in from a station here. That's being burned in the towers. They're growing trees, passing them all out down here as wood. Some of the wood is being passed around to be made into seeds, which allows it to be fed in at the top again. But the problem is it's not actually quite as quick as we need. So we've got another one. Yes, they're actually kind of obvious because they look a bit different from everything else. So we've got another one exactly the same up here. And as I say, it's easy with the city block design. You just copy and paste it and everything just works. Saphira said he reckons each one of these blocks will be producing about 8 to 9 wood per second. But unfortunately, you can't check it with the rate calculator because rate calculator doesn't entirely understand agricultural towers. Perhaps because the area they can grow on is a little bit varied, so they may or may not run at full speed. Or maybe because the agricultural tower doesn't know anything about the growth rate of the trees. It just plants one when there isn't one and pulls one up when it's fully grown. So it doesn't know, but it'll do what it can. We can look at the rate calculator though to get a vague idea of how much is being produced, and we can see that we're making about 1,500 a minute over the last 10 minutes, 1,500 a minute over the last 10 hour as well. Oh, and then you can see here where the second city block was put in to grow twice as much, to double the wood production. That's pretty cool. So yes, you can see that we're getting through quite a lot of wood, or at least it's getting taken away as fast as it's being made. But we're now making it at about 1,500 a minute, and that seems to be a fairly good rate. Although it's worth noting that this doesn't include the wood used to make the seeds. Saphir did say he had some minor issues with the inserters not inserting fuel and seeds. It was having trouble with trying to put more seeds in instead of putting wood in. And you can see that's sort of happening here. This inserter is holding on to seeds already when it should actually be putting wood in. Previously, on Lignumis, we sorted that problem out by putting the fuel on the near side of the belt, and so that means that the inserters would prioritise putting fuel in, and then they grab a handful of seeds, and eventually they put the seeds in. But once you've used up some of the fuel, they would then grab a load of fuel, put that in, and then go back to the seeds. So that worked here. But over on Norvis, he used a slightly simpler system, which works very nicely because we've now got red underground belts, which we didn't have on Lignumis, where he's just got one inserter inserting the fuel and one inserter inserting seeds. So yeah, that's great. Mike went round adding in mining for basically all of the fiddly little patches he could find, or at least all the ones he had time to do. So we've got things like this coal patch here, and oh no, this was Marc who did this one. But anyway, the principle stands. We've got a funny little copper. We've got a funny little copper patch that we want the copper ore, but also it's kind of in the way of some of the rails. So he's squeezed in as many drills as he can around it, and that's feeding out. I talked about this sort of problem in the last video, but now notice that we've had a number of patches put in sensible places wherever it's reasonably possible to pull it out. So over here there's a copper patch been taken up in there. We've got an iron patch up there, although that's outside the system. We've got a couple of iron patches over here. There's an absolutely horrific copper ore patch that's right over one of the rails down here, and yes, this is one of the ones that Mike did. So that's digging out basically he's digging out as much of the copper as he can, then feeding it through a balancer over here and into a station so it can be taken away and used. And the hope is that we'll start to use up all of these patches, but maybe in the meantime we can get in small things. So here, for example, we've got lube production. That only requires 2 of the stations, so that's a good one to have in here. And we can then use a 3rd station for copper production. Down here we've got brick production, which means we need to bring in stone at the top and feed out bricks at the bottom, but that means there's a station available over here, so Mike can put in this iron mine here, and that means he's been able to pull up one of the stubs of rail over here, although there is still a signal that's been in the way, so you can't get everything. But he's done his best to get in as many drills as possible and pull up as much of the iron ore as possible. And we've also lost a few of the mines down the side here, so that part of the patch has already been dug up. So this is working basically as well as possible under the circumstances, and this is going to allow us to dig up a lot of the random ore patches that are scattered around the place. We've got another city block here that's bringing in wood from those plantations that we were looking at before, and it's turning it into lumber and then into wooden gears, which then could be shipped out by the system, and also into lumber, which could be shipped out by the system as well. So we've got those two both being produced in the same block, which is quite nice because they're both coming from the same original source, so you might as well put them in the same block, and it just works quite nicely. We do need a supply of something to feed these lumber mills, and we're currently running them off crushed wood by the looks of it, which is, I see, being produced up here as crushed wood, and that's being fed down here to power all of these machines, and then round over this way up here to feed all of these ones. And crushed wood is a nice fuel type to use here. Because if we take a look at the lumber mill, you'll see it accepts quite a lot of different types of fuel, but crushed wood is the only one of those that comes from something that is already on this block. So all of these would require a different input of something, whether it's an ingredient to make one of these things or the actual thing itself. They would all require something else to be brought in. However, crushed wood allows it to run just off the single input up here, and it means we don't need to use the other station down here to bring in yet another resource, which makes this a lot easier and a lot more straightforward. And I think I'm probably going to use something like this on Lignumis in order to power a load of the machinery up there, because I want to stop using the peat if I can, but I do want them to have something that they can be powered by. We looked at stone bricks a moment ago. There's not really much to see here. It's just feeding in cut stone, cooking it into stone bricks, and then feeding it out as bricks at the bottom. I don't think there's anything to say about that. Oh, we do have some machines in here that are claiming they're making steel. That was because I think there may have been iron in here before for some reason. I don't know whether that was a train mistake or a repurposing of a block or something like that. But some of these, yes, some of these have still got some iron plate in, so those will need to be removed like this. The reason most of them have been done, but those few haven't, is because it was most cleaned up manually, or I say manually, like this, by telling the bots to take it away. And then we were waiting for a train of stone to actually arrive here to make it a bit more obvious which ones still actually have some iron in them, and then we can go through and actually just tidy it up like this and just deal with it once and for all properly, so it won't happen again. We're making iron gears on the bus. This is fairly trivial because it just turns iron into iron gears. Personally, I probably wouldn't have bothered, but also it does save a bit of space on trains. It means you're not trying to drop quite as much stuff off in some of the stations, so there's some logic to it. But because it's a one-to-one and iron is used in so many other places, personally, I probably wouldn't have bothered. We have, in theory, sand production. So this brings in stone, crushes it down into sand, and feeds it off to a station down here to be taken away. You know, exactly the standard way you'd expect. We've also got an additional station over here for the for stone overflow. Oh no, that's being passed around here to be recirculated and go back in again. Okay, good, that makes perfect sense. Oh, we apparently get a little bit of coal out as a byproduct. Okay, so that's being fed over to a separate station to be taken away. And I imagine this has been set with a really high priority. Yes, you see, there we go, got a priority of 20 on this particular station. And that means that when coal is required somewhere, if there's a train load available here, it will be picked up from here first rather than from a mine, and that means that in theory we won't overflow here. As long as we're using coal somewhere, it'll be taken from here, and that should mean that we keep this station under overflow under control. And that's the wonder of the prioritization system in LTN. It means you don't have to have some sort of funky system of intermediates where you take all of the coal to a central place and then prioritize it there. You can just have a priority set on the stations. Much, much better. This does show, though, that we seem to have a shortage of stone at the moment, so that's going to be something we need to look into. Additional iron smelting has been added. This is exactly the same as the other iron smeltery. It takes in crushed iron ore, it cooks it, and it outputs iron plates. Lovely. Then we started making stuff for science packs, and this started off with making engine units. So these are, this is a block making engine units. We're bringing in iron at the top here, bringing in steel down here, and that's it, and then outputting engine units over here. So there's a steady flow of them going out. This has probably been designed to run at the speed that these belts can run at if they had a proper supply. So this is an area where it looks like we need some better balancing going on the belts here. So we're only using the iron from one side of the belts. It does seem to be running fairly well, though, so it's not too much of a problem. I do notice that despite what I was just saying about iron gears being made on the city block system, we are bringing in the iron and turning it into iron gears and pipes over here. We could bring in the iron gears down here and feed them in separately. Would that be better? Well, it would mean less load on the iron input. Whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know. I do sort of want at this point to be putting in some side balancing on some of maybe on each of the outputs from along here or somewhere in here, just to make sure this is running at full speed, because it does look like we are a bit short of iron here. So the gears do seem to be gradually being depleted along here. So that's potentially going to be a problem at some point in the future. Not a serious one, but a little bit of a problem. With those engine units, I've also put in production of electric engine units, or at least I have in theory. In practice, we seem to have run out of green circuits, so that's a bit of a problem. But we're going to work on that. I think we're going to need to drop in another city block making green circuits, because at the moment I think the supplies are pretty good, but it's very much struggling. So you can see over here, yes, there is a station trying to drop off green circuits, but there haven't been any brought to it, and so it's ground to a halt. Other than that, it's exactly as you'd expect. We've got the inputs, engines, green circuits, and lube being dropped off at 3 stations around the top, and then the electric motors being passed out to the station at the bottom. Batteries are exactly the same, and these are running nicely. We've got sulfuric acid coming in over here, iron at the top, copper over here, mixed all together in a chemical plant, and boom, batteries. I mentioned how green circuit production was struggling, and in the last stream, or possibly the one before, I came in and I doubled it. So I copied this side and pasted it in over here and put in an additional copper drop-off station as well. I got the maths a little bit wrong with this because I thought that would be sufficient, but it turns out actually it's not 2 copper to 1 iron, it's 3 copper to 2 iron. So I had to come in here and finagle in some extra belts to output this fast enough and to keep it balanced. So it's a little bit of a mess. But it is working, and it's still not enough, as you've seen. So we're going to need to copy this again, put it in another city block. It doesn't really matter where. There's an empty one down here with a load of water in it. With an empty one up here I could drop it into. It's going to be easy to double the rate of production. We're just going to need to do that. Mike decided it would be a good idea to start trying to produce plastic using the lignumis recipe down on Norvis. And so in order to get that going, I shipped over everything he needed for a starter culture. That was some peat and a load of the gold stromatolite seeds. That's enough to get the system kick-started and running. So he did that in this chemical plant over here, and this has been left alone in case of emergencies. So he's still got some of the resources in there that will allow it to be restarted and start producing what they call the cupria viridis. He then expanded it out massively. So over here you can see we've got loads of machines turning wood into wood pulp, and then we've got machines over here that are breeding the cupria viridis nicators, and then more machines breeding more of the cupria viridis nicators and turn them directly into plastic. And so this system works quite nicely in theory, where we're producing a load of it along here, and remember each time this runs it produces 4.5 times the amount it uses in order to start it running. So there's plenty to spit out down into the rest of the system. Those can then be fed into these ones, and that will give these enough to start, and then they'll chuck their 45 they make directly into the plastic making machines, and they'll make plastic and spit it out over here. If we ever get any dead ones, they can be put onto belts that will then bring them down to here, where we've got some more machines that will make it out of the dead ones as well. So this system should work quite nicely. Unfortunately, it seems to keep starving and grinding itself to a halt. So we did a little bit of investigation, and it turned out it was failing because we had shortages of wood, and that meant we weren't making enough wood pulp, and that meant the systems down here were getting starved of wood pulp, and they were then dumping out all the cupria viridis nicators, and it was all getting some of it was getting loaded back into the inputs, as you'd hope, and then it was dying in the inputs. And they keep unloading because the belts would be empty, and then it would stop working and they'd starve, and you come over and you go, why has it stopped? Because by that time some more wood would have arrived and we'd have plenty of wood pulp, and it would just look like it had died for no apparent reason. Eventually we worked out that the problem was happening because we were running out of the wood pulp because there wasn't enough wood coming in, which may have been fixed by now by that additional plantation that we were talking about earlier. And so we came over here to reconfigure these to only run when there's more than 1,000 wood pulp in the system, which there currently is, so these inserters are enabled. And so they should be unloading. And that 1,000 wood pulp should be enough to then get all these machines running. Now actually 1,000 isn't all that much. I feel that perhaps we should be going a little bit higher. Although we do seem to be turning off the pump on the input here when there's more than 10,000. So maybe it should be about 8,000, something like that. However, it doesn't seem to have worked. We're still running out in here, and it's still causing problems. I've also put in a prioritization here that should pass any cupria viridis nicators back round the system here. So I've tried to copy the system I have on lignumis because that hasn't failed yet, but the lignumis one has some advantages, which we'll talk about in a second. So the idea is these will dump out onto the outer side of the belt. It'll then run around the outside, and then go onto the inside, and then it'll run around the inside as well, and then it'll come around here, and then it'll get stuck at this point because it won't be able to load onto the inside of the belt because it'll already be being filled from the outside of the belt. And that means then that the oldest stuff, which is coming around on the inside of the belt, having gone all the way around the loop, is then going to get to here. It's not going to be able to pass through this bit, so it's going to get unloaded and be dumped onto the belt down here. And that seemed to be working nicely. We had a nice loop of reasonably fresh cupria viridis nicators going round and round here. And in theory, if you then get to the point where there's nothing new to be dumped onto the belt, you'll just get it running round and round and round the small loop in the middle. And so you shouldn't ever run out. If there's anything dies, it'll get pulled out down here, but that shouldn't happen because it should always get fed back into the input, and there should always be some in the output because we'll never output unless we have enough wood pulp available to make some more from whatever gets put into the input. So it's a bit of a mystery as to why it died. We're going to have to watch this a bit more carefully in the next stream and try and see when it breaks and what causes that, because it's a little bit weird. Over on lignumis, as you can see here, I've got basically the same system where the cupria viridis nicators, they're being fed round here on the inside, and then we've got this priority splitter here, and then they're being fed onto the inside of the belt in order to come back round here where they're feeding these machines to keep them running. And if any of them die on the way round or run out of lifespan, then they'll get dumped out by this splitter here, so the dead ones will be taken away, much like the system over on Norvis. And this system does seem to just keep working. If we have a look in one of these machines, then there's none held in the input at the moment, and there's loads and loads in the output. I haven't put in the rules on these ones because we don't seem to be running out of wood pulp on this planet, but it is just ticking over nicely. So these machines at the bottom, which aren't needed, they've got to the point where anything on the input side that's died off and has been disposed of, and there's a load left on the output side which can be used for emergency restarts. And then this one at the top that's actually carrying the entire factory at the moment because our requirements for plastic are quite low. Well, here you can see we've got a little bit of dead stuff on the output, but that can be taken away by the inserter whenever it wants to. Over here we've got some on the input that's gradually dying, but that isn't a problem because if it does die, then it can grab some of this slightly fresher stuff and put it from here and put it in. Because if this dies, it'll automatically be moved over onto there. And if it does clog up the output, then the machine will stop until it eventually clears that out, and then it'll start running. It should be okay. That does make me wonder, actually, if the output inserter prioritises the live stuff, which it does seem to, because it's holding some live at the moment. And let's see if it runs, if this plastic machine runs again at any point. There we go. It's grabbed from the live side rather than taking out the dead as a preference. So potentially that could be what's causing the issue over on Norvis. Maybe it's unloading the live stuff instead of the dead. And so eventually it runs out of live to unload and we get quite a lot of dead onto this side over here. And that means we only get dead flowing out, and that causes it to not be able to restart. Could that be the problem? Maybe. Oh no, we are feeding, there we go, we fed some more live in as well on the other side because the amount on the output there has got down to a certain level. I do wonder if perhaps there could be a perfect storm somewhere in the middle where your consumption rate is at just the wrong point, where sometimes some more dead stuff gets put over here and it gradually fills up and fills up and fills up until you've got too much of it over here and that jams the machine up. Then you get rid of all the live, and then it unloads all the dead. So perhaps the way to fix this would be to put some sort of priority system onto the filters for the inserters to make sure they unload dead first, and then unload live afterwards. I don't think you can do that by setting dead and then live. I don't believe it works through the filters in the order they're shown here, but we'll find out in a second. I think it does it based on the order they appear in the tab system up here, but we'll find out in a moment. There we go, the hand is empty. Yeah, so it's still grabbing out the live stuff, even though I put dead in the first slot. So it's going to need some cunning circuit cleverness in order to fix that. Now, Lignumis has an additional advantage over Norvis because there is an unlimited supply of the gold stromatolites and the peat coming in here. And so that means if this ever does die, because from whatever reason, we will always be able to kickstart it again by making some more live Cupravidas here that can be fed through and into the breeders over here. So Lignumis is at a major advantage over Norvis. I think I might have worked out what the problem is here, and hopefully that'll give Mike some ideas as how to fix it. One possibility might be to put in an additional inserter here like that and set that one up to only do the dead stuff, so it'll take the dead out, and then this one will take the live out, and that means the dead gets priority because it goes onto the belt first. Maybe that will sort it, maybe it won't. I'll let Mike think about that in the next stream though. That was a little bit of a diversion. The next thing to mention is that we put in another nuclear power plant, works in exactly the same way as the other one, except that we've currently got a shortage of dull uranium, so that needs to be sorted. But Tristan brought a load of fuel cells over manually by construction bot and dropped them off, presumably in the output of these machines. Or maybe he brought over some dull uranium, I don't know. But either way, we now have a significant quantity of uranium fuel cells flowing around here, so we have another nuclear power plant. Works in exactly the same way as the other one, using an SR latch over here to only trigger when it's actually needed. This one goes at 20 and 97. The other one goes at 60 and 97. So in theory, this one will get the priority and will only kick in with the second nuclear reactor when we have when the first nuclear reactor can't keep up. And that makes a lot of sense because this one has all the resources available to make lots and lots of nuclear power cells. This one doesn't, and so we only want to use this one in case of emergencies. So it's filled up all its steam tanks, it's got the reactors nice and hot, and so it's just turned off. We're not running the reactors, we're not feeding power out, it's just not needed. And on that powerful note, I think this is a good time to stop the video. I've been going on for about long enough by this point. So next time I shall start talking about the science packs and how we're making those out on the city block system. So keep your eyes out for tomorrow's video for the other half of how everything is getting moved over to city blocks. We'll be back on Monday for some more streaming, by which time we'll probably be out on Vulcanus building up all kinds of Lavary-based goodness out there. And I'll be back on Wednesday to stream some more Foundry, which is a lot like Factorio, but with a third dimension to play with. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss out on any of that. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.